Thank you for tuning in to another episode of One More Story. Just a quick programming note, parents, if you'd like to skip past the interview and go straight to the first story, you can find it at the 17-minute, 50-second mark, but I would encourage you to come back to it. CISSY does a masterful job explaining the current AI situation and how we forge a path forward that protects artists. She is super knowledgeable and articulate, and you'll want to give it a listen, so sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's episode. My guest tonight is CISSY Jones, a talented voiceover actress whose voice has appeared in The Walking Dead, Life is Strange, Grand Theft Auto 5, Darksiders 3, and Firewatch, for which she won a BAFTA in 2017. CISSY, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I didn't know that you were a BAFTA award-winning actress. That's impressive.
Well, I usually walk around with it hanging around my neck, Flav, but,
right?
No,
it's not
a weird
something
thing.
you just drop in casual conversation.
No, it's not like, hi, I'm BAFTA winner, CISSY Jones. It's just, whatever. Like, no, it's good. It's you don't get into voiceover to be famous. Let me just say that, right?
And I didn't know that they did BAFTA awards for video games. I guess there's a lot I don't know.
It's one of the only major academies that does any sort of recognition of voiceover, which is really nice because wouldn't it be great if we had some recognition at home?
I mean, you're not talking in your family, you're talking about in America, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we have the video game awards here and we have the Annies, but people in voiceover work harder than anybody I've ever met. And it would be nice to get a little bit of love stateside.
Well, tell me a little bit about that, because I've done some voiceover stuff as well. And people who I talk to outside of the industry, they're always like, why don't you just do voiceover work? That's so easy. You just wear your pajamas, you roll out of bed, and you just talk into a mic. It's super easy. Anybody can do that.
If anybody can do that, why is it so hard for the average voiceover person to make a living? Right? Yes, you can roll up in your pajamas and you can just talk into a microphone. And if that's all you do, you're not going to work. I take my craft very seriously at the risk of sounding like a blowhard. I love what I do. I put a lot of effort into it. I show up coffeeed and with my vocal warm-ups done and ready to rock. I never roll out of bed and show up to a session. I work very hard at what I do. Now,
did you always do voiceover or did you start on camera? Tell me a little bit about your path, your journey.
Well, I had a pretty standard journey into voiceover, whereas I have a business degree and I worked in the Silicon Valley for 10 years. And then I became a voice actor. So that's usually how it goes, right?
Wow.
I was doing the whole tech startup thing and didn't love it. And I remember thinking one day, man, I'd love to be a voice on The Simpsons, but you probably just got to live in Hollywood. Oh, well. And 2 weeks later, Nancy Cartwright, who's the voice of Bart Simpson, came on the radio to promote the Simpsons movie and mentioned a voiceover school nearby. So I started taking classes, and 2 years later, I was able to get signed to an LA agent, which is not easy to do, and moved here and never looked back.
So did you always do voices as a kid?
I always wanted to be an actor. I remember telling my parents, I want to be an actor when I grow up. And they were like, no, you want to do finance and be in business. No acting. And I was like, okay. But it just never left, I tried doing the business thing and I tried being a suit and I wasn't really a suit. I was a peon, but it was like a square peg in a round hole.
Right.
And I have found in my life, when I find the thing that is right, whether it's a career or friendships or my husband, relationships, when it's right, it just kind of comes together like a zipper. Right. You know what I mean? There's no friction. It's just no, this is what it's meant to be. Follow that path. So I did that.
Well, and you do. I mean, you have to love it. I mean, I talk to so many artists on the show, writers, actors, directors, and you have to have a deep passion for it. Otherwise, do anything else because it is so hard.
It is. And it's one of the things we joke about all the time is that every time I leave the studio, I'm unemployed, which is a hard reality sometimes, right? It's okay, well, let's hope we eat next month.
It's only getting harder. We've got dual strikes going on, the very rapid rise of AI and how that's being introduced to everything. So I wanted to get your thoughts. I know you were just down at Comic-Con. and that was addressed a bit. But how do you see the future of voice acting unfolding given all the new technology that's going on, and how do you see us as actors, writers, artists protecting ourselves and our right to earn a living?
Honestly, that's something I've spent the better part of the last 2 years trying to figure out. I sit on the board at the National Association of Voice Actors, or NAVA. So if anybody listening is a voice actor, it doesn't matter if you've only had one credit. As long as you've had one single paid credit, you are allowed to be a part of NAVA, which gives you access to healthcare.
Really?
You don't have to make $26,000 a year. You can get healthcare from NAVA. But we also really focus on education and mentorship and advocacy of voice actors, because it is kind of the stepchild of the acting industry, if you will. You know, people overlook it very frequently. So NAVA was created to advocate on behalf of voice actors, and we work alongside SAG. We're constantly sharing information and working together. It's not a either or type of thing. It's just we support one another, which is great. Anyway, NAVA and I started working on this AI question a while ago and trying to figure out amongst a group of us, like, what is the framework that voiceover can exist with AI? Because we all know that technology doesn't move backwards, right? It's here. We have to figure out how do we exist with it or lose our voices forever. Because as it stands today, my voice is on multiple data sites where I gave no consent for them to have my voice, but because things are publicly available, vis-a-vis, the Owl House or video games or podcasts or Instagram videos or your outgoing voicemail message, people can take that and plug it into a site and claim ownership of it. And then suddenly your voice is there and you have no say, you have no pay. That rhymed. That was not planned. So how do we then turn the tides and say, okay, technology, you're here. What I need as an actor, what we all need, the three main tenets are consent, control, and compensation, right? So consent. Number one, I know that you're turning me into a digital voice, and I say, sure, no problem. The issue that we've seen a lot in major contracts from union signatory companies, is that, they attach these writers to the union contract. So there's the original union contract, all collectively bargained, and it's pretty. And then they will just attach these 20-page writers that says all this other stuff. And on page 17 of 20, they'll just tack in a little line in there that says, we reserve the right to take your recording sessions and make a digital double of you. Okay, thanks, bye.
Oh, wow.
That is not active consent. That is passive consent. That is trying to slip one by us. And every week the language is changing because the attorneys are trying to cover their bases and make sure it becomes boilerplate. And so our job is to read our contracts and make sure it does not become boilerplate. And reading contracts is not fun.
No.
It's terrible. I digress. So there's that. And if it is a union contract, you can take it to the union and the union will fight it because it's not collectively bargained. So there's that. The second piece is control. I need to know where my voice is being used, right? I need to know what projects it's going on. If it's going to be on a broadcast commercial, is it going to be Toyota? And then that takes me out of auditioning for Honda and Mitsubishi and anything else. Is it going to be on something that I don't want my children to ever hear, right? Because there are also things that are not safe for work. And I don't want my voice saying those things without my control, without me saying yes or no. And lastly, of course, is compensation. We need to figure out a way that anytime our digital voice is used, we get paid. I am working on that. I was approached by a company. We are still in stealth mode, but they came to me after seeing us post our guidelines online at navavoices.org/synth-AI. And they said, we want to create a company that exists within this framework. Will you help us? And every time I've come back to them and said, we do this, they go, okay, neat. You want tracking? You can log in anytime and see where your voice is being used for you, your agent, SAG, whoever. Great. We'll do that. You want more pay? Neat. We'll do that too. So we are working on that. And we're just getting a couple of final things in place. And then I'm hoping that will be the benchmark going forward. There's always going to be illicit predatory companies and predatory contracts and things like that. And especially in non-union, we really have to be careful. But if we can set a benchmark today for how voiceover and AI can exist tomorrow, we stand a chance.
That sounds awesome. I mean, I'm just a simple writer with a podcast that tells stories, and so I don't know the ins and outs of all of this, but I feel like that model would be very successful for a film production company that just, I mean, I know A24 has agreed to SAG's terms, and so they're continuing to go into production on things. But why doesn't a bigger company just break out of the mold and just go, hey, we're going to be transparent with everything. We're going to show you everything. If we make money, you make money. I guess at the end of the day, it's just greed and they just can't get enough. I don't know. I'm just, like I said, I'm just a writer. I don't know anything.
I mean, but this is where I have hope for, our kids and their generation is like, imagine a world in which companies care about people first and profit second.
I feel like there's no long-term thinking.
Yeah, no, it's very short-sighted, and it's all about what's next week's earnings call going to present, right?
Right.
Again, having come from the Silicon Valley, like I've seen all of that. And that's where we have to start changing minds. I mean, the thing that makes me so hopeful about this company that I'm working with, again, is anytime I have said, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, can we make it that? They go, yeah, of course. So there are people out there that care.
Yeah.
There are people out there that want to preserve all of us. It's not just my bottom line and forget everybody else. There are people that care. And it's just a matter of amplifying their voices and not buying yachts for everyone. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, and getting those people with those voices that need amplification funding too.
Yes, working on that too.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So, well, I don't know if we can talk about anything you're working on because I'm in a tricky spot with a podcast. I can't promote anything. I don't know. Can we talk about anything?
So I have some animated stuff that we can talk about because television animation is not struck. I was in Disney's Owl House. Season 3 just wrapped, but it is a wonderful show that really highlights diversity in every aspect. But the thing I love about the show is that it's not like, here is our person who is non-binary. It's just, they just exist.
Right.
They just exist in this beautiful world of witches and demons and craziness. And it's fun. And the line that everybody quotes is, us weirdos have to stick together. And that's the whole ethos of the show, right? Which I love so much. So being a part of that has been just breathtaking. I've also been on the most recent season of Boss Baby. I play a terrible baby from Luxembourg. Yeah, and I have a couple more animated series coming out. I've got a ton of video games coming out. Remnant 2 just dropped this week, and that's people are loving that, which is fun. Yeah, honestly, this AI thing has just been eating up like 90% of my day.
Yeah. It's all consuming right now for a lot of people, and there's just a lot of uncertainty, and nobody knows what the shape of the business looks like when we come out on the other side. And I think that's the scariest thing is there's no way to predict that.
I have hope. I do have hope. I have hope for the first time in a long time.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So with all the AI anxiety and how busy you are, how do you settle down? How do you get yourself to sleep at night?
My favorite thing to do at the end of my day is to sit down with my kids when they're reading their books. And sometimes we read out loud together and sometimes they read to themselves. And then we snuggle. We have a snuggle fest every night. And it is my favorite time of day. I have 2 amazing children and I love hearing about their days. And I love hearing about what they're excited about and what they wish had gone differently. And just, they're getting older. I know I'm not going to have these days forever. So just being able to be there with them and talk and laugh and, be silly it's my favorite thing in the whole world.
Yeah, it's a good way to sort of cap off a day.
How do you settle down at night?
How do I settle down? Oh, well, I have found that so if I read, the problem is I fall right asleep and then I forget what I read. So I have to read during the day.
That's fair.
Which is something I'm trying to do more regularly. I've gotten bad, just too many distractions but I find reading really restorative. So at night though, what I do, we'll watch a show, something that we're both into. Once the kids are down, we do the bedtime routine. We put on this podcast often now because occasionally they'll be like, "Hey, Dad, can you just tell us another story?" I'm like, I'm running out of things. I'm doing this every week. Like so sometimes I'll riff on that, and we'll do a bedtime story. Sometimes the kids will actually do a story duel together, which has been really sweet. A nice little
That's cool.
unexpected outcome from me doing this show was, I would always do these stories with my daughter, occasionally with my son when he was younger, but he's 11 now and wasn't super into it. But now that I have a podcast, he's like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Right.
And so now he's super into it. They actually want to come on the show and they want to do a story duel. And so it's been really fun to connect. And that's why, this is, and I haven't really said this on the podcast. I've said this to people privately, but this podcast has really saved my mental health during the strikes and work shutdown, because I realized that I am a compulsive creator and I have to get stories out. And being a writer, director who's come very close to having things made only to be disappointed at the very end, it's frustrating because you're just waiting on these gatekeepers. And this is an opportunity for me to put stories out without a gatekeeper. And so it's been really nice. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I'll probably end up cutting this out. I don't know, but
Please don't. I think it's so important. I think it's so important for people to hear that. We all have to take care of our mental health, and being a creative in a world where you are constantly waiting for somebody else to give you the green light it's really hard. It's really challenging. So I feel that with my soul. I really do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's been great, and so it helps wind things down. I do take a children's melatonin though.
Ooh, that sounds great.
Well, it's a 1 milligram, and it's like this little gummy, and it's perfect because I found that like 5 milligrams, I've got like a melatonin hangover.
Yeah.
I can't do 10. I'm super groggy in the morning. But like 1, as a middle-aged man, it gets me over that hump of having to wake up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom. So
Is it a gummy? Do you get to chew your gummy before you go to bed?
yeah, I have a little gummy, and it's wonderful.
Perfect.
I have usually a glass of red wine and a gummy, and we watch a show, and it's fantastic. So
Amazing.
that's how I shut it down.
I love that.
Well, Sissy Jones, are you ready to dive into the story duel?
Let me get my stretches in. All right, let's do this.
All right. So the word is towel. Once upon a time, there was a farmer named Ronald. And Ronald was a very hardworking farmer. He had a wife named Margaret, and he had so many kids he didn't even remember their names, so I'm not even going to get into their names. But he had a lot of kids, and he and Margaret worked very hard. They were corn farmers in the Midwest, and the last few corn harvesting seasons hadn't been great. They hadn't had the rain that they were hoping for, that they expected. It was unusually dry, it was hot, and their corn yield was much lower. The corn cobs were not growing as tall. They would take them to market, and they wouldn't get much for the corn, and so they were struggling. And Ronald and Margie, because he called her Margie for short, Ronald and Margie were so frustrated, and they were losing money, and there were repairs they needed to do to the farm, and they had a lot of kids to feed. And he was ready to throw in the towel. And kids, if you don't know what that means ready to give up. He was depressed, he was angry, and he felt like a failure, he felt like he needed to provide for his family, and he didn't know what to do. And Margie was an amazing wife, and she was a farmer in her own right. I mean, she did everything right by his side. I mean, she was practically his business partner, and they worked the fields together. They did everything. And she said, you know what, Ronald, I understand that you're stressed out, I'm stressed out. But she was handling it a little bit better than he was spinning out. He was really spinning out, and she was a great sounding board for him. And she said, I think you should take a road trip and just clear your head. The farm will be here when you get back. This is a time where I can handle things on the home front. I'm very capable. Why don't you just take a week and find yourself? And maybe you'll discover an answer to all of our problems. So reluctantly, because Ronald didn't want to leave. He was a dedicated family man, loved his wife, and he hated the thought of, setting off on his own. But he ultimately agreed, and so he set off in his Oldsmobile down the road.
After he left, Margie sat with her kids, and she said, all right, guys, we are going to fix this place up. We are going to get everything going the way it needs to go, and I'm going to need everybody's help. And they said, okay, no problem. So they all went off to go take care of whatever they needed to take care of. And Margie sat down and spoke to her goddess. And she said, Goddess, I need your help. Our land is not what it used to be. My husband is struggling. My children are healthy, but I want to keep them strong. And I know I can take care of this place, but I just need a little bit of help. And so they went to bed that night. And as they slept, this beautiful glow came over the land. And it was filled with nutrients and light and love in a way that we forget that the land needs love. And when they woke up in the morning, the land smelled different. The earth felt different on their feet. The kids were happier than they'd been in a while, and their breakfast tasted sweeter, and the pancakes were fluffier than they'd ever been. And Margie looked around, and all of a sudden she started to see all of the things that needed to change in order to continue to make their life on this farm. And so she pulled the corn from the field and decided that instead they were going to grow sunflowers. And she planted the entire field in sunflowers while Ronald was gone and taking a much-needed break for himself. And in her mind, she started to see that these sunflowers would not only provide color and beauty in the world, but sunflower seeds were also something that could be sold. And people love sunflower seeds. You see people at baseball games and they got a mouthful of sunflower seeds, or you're on a road trip and they've got a mouthful of sunflower seeds and an open bag beside them. And so the kids got really excited too. And they all jumped in and they all started to help planting these sunflower seeds. And even though Ronald was gone for, maybe a couple of weeks, and it usually takes a lot longer for crops to grow, they started to see these sunflowers coming up very quickly. And they were beautiful. And they weren't just yellow, but they were blue and purple and orange and teal and all of these amazing colors that you never get to see in a sunflower.
And meanwhile, on the road, Ronald had stopped to see his buddy Jimmy, who lived in Chicago. And Jimmy had gotten them tickets to see a Cubs game at Wrigley Field. And, Ronald had lived in the Midwest his whole life and loved baseball. Who doesn't love baseball? I mean, some people don't love baseball, but they just don't understand it, and we won't worry about that. But it's the greatest game ever. He got great tickets right behind the Cubs dugout. It was a beautiful day at Wrigley Field. It was a clear 75 degrees, light winds blowing out. A lot of home runs that day. Cubs won. But the most important thing that happened that day was they were sitting in the stands. They were having a cold 24-ounce old style beer, which is a local Chicago beer, which is very delicious. I don't actually know if they serve it still at Wrigley, but they used to. And he was snacking on some sunflower seeds. And as he was putting these delicious, salty treats into his mouth, he had an epiphany. And he knew what he wanted to do. He said, oh my God, I got to get home. I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to pull up all the corn and we're going to plant sunflowers and we're going to be sunflower. And because he looked around the stadium and everybody had sunflower seeds. They were kids spitting shells everywhere and just having a good time, and sunflower seeds were everywhere. And so on his way back to somewhere in the Midwest, he picked up some sunflower seeds for the road, and he was chomping on sunflower seeds the whole way home. And he drove up, and he nearly fell over because he did not expect to see his farm had already been converted to a sunflower farm. And Margie came running out. She gave him a great big hug. She was like, you're not mad because I kind of went rogue. And I mean, we didn't really, I know we always kind of talk about everything, and this is sort of a big development. And he was like, no. He's like, I had a moment. And she was like, did the goddess come visit you? And he was like, no. I was at Wrigley Field, and I was eating sunflower seeds, and I had this idea, and you had this idea, and thank you. And he was so appreciative. And so fast forward 2 years, Ronald and Margie's farm became the biggest sunflower producer in the United States of America, and they signed an exclusive contract with Major League Baseball to provide all of the sunflower seeds for all Major League games. And he was able to provide for his family, and they just had a wonderful time as sunflower farmers. The end. Sissy Jones, are you ready for your solo story?
Gulp. I'm ready, coach. Put me in.
All right. So the word is fancy dinner. It's 2 words.
Fancy dinner. Once upon a time, there were 2 little kitties. These little kitties' names were Bump and Buster. And Bump was a beautiful, black, shiny kitty cat. And Buster had orange and white and black and gray, and she was just fun. She just had this really lively persona. Bump could be a little skittish sometimes and like to hide under the bed a lot of times or behind trash cans and stuff. But Buster wanted to see the world. Buster was ready for any adventure that came her way. And she and Bump were brother and sister. And so, they didn't always get along, but they loved each other very, very deeply. And one day Buster said, I want to go see the world, Bump. Let's go see what's out there. And Bump said, but I'm scared. What if we get taken? Or what if we get chased by dogs? Or what if there's a great big bird that wants to nip at my fur? I like my shiny fur. And Buster said, I'll protect you, Bump. Trust me. Come on. Let's go explore. We're not really living if we don't go explore. And Bump was really nervous because he really just liked his nice cozy bed and the things that he knew, and he didn't have to learn anything new. He just wanted to be where he was because that was his comfort place. But he also really loved Buster, and he wanted to be wherever she was. And so reluctantly, one day, Bump took a deep breath and said, Buster, I'm ready. Let's go see the world. And so Bump and Buster gathered all of their favorite kitty belongings, which was basically yarn and a can of tuna, and decided that they were going to go out and explore the world. And as they left even their neighborhood, Bump was really struggling. He was nervous, and he was looking around at everything. And what was that? And what was that bird? And who's that walking down the street? Is that a dog? And Buster just said, have confidence. Walk with me tall, and put your chest out like you know what you're doing and you belong here. Let's go. And Bump said, okay. And he took a minute, and he took a deep breath. He stuck his chest out, and he started strutting down the street like he belonged there. And oh my goodness, the whole world just stopped and took notice of these 2 beautiful confident kitty cats walking down the street. And soon enough, a car pulled up and said, "You look like two confident kitty cats. Do you need a ride somewhere?" And they said, "I don't get in the car with strangers, bud, but thanks so much." And they kept on walking. And then they came to a street that was completely different from where they used to live. It had purple flowers on the sidewalks and great big trees with beautiful branches overhanging. And it looked like there was like a perfect little tree house up in the tree. And Buster looked at Bump and said, "We gotta go up there." And Bump took a deep breath. Okay. And they went up and they climbed up the tree. Bump had never climbed up a tree, you see, and he didn't know that his claws were so effective for climbing up trees. And Buster was up there lickety-split. And so she got up and she looked around this tree house and she started to see there were all of these like cat scratching posts and like little furry balls hanging from the ceiling that they could play with and toy mice and all of this stuff. And when Bump got up there and saw all of the fun that had been waiting for them just around the corner this whole time, they had the time of their lives. And they played and they scratched and they ran and they meowed and they had so much fun. They fell asleep and they had the best night's sleep of their life. And the next morning, Bump got up first and said, "Buster, I'm ready. Let's keep exploring. This is amazing, and we know we can come back here. Let's go see what else is out there." And Buster said, "Oh, you got it, buddy." And so they stretched their little kitty bodies out. They stuck their butts up in the air and shook them a little bit. And then they carefully climbed back down the tree, which is not easy for cats to do, but they did it. So they kept walking, and they walked and walked and walked and walked and walked. And sure enough, pretty soon they came to a dog park. And Bump got so scared. And Buster looked at him and said, "Bump, you know what you need to do." And Bump sat and took a deep breath. "I'm ready." And they walked into the dog park just to see what was going on. And sooner or later, this little dog came over to them and said, "Hi, I'm Ranger. Who are you?" And they introduced themselves. And Ranger had a beautiful white coat with brown spots. And Ranger was also quite shiny. And so the three of them shone together and they became friends. And then another big dog came over and was like, "Cats aren't allowed in the dog park." And Ranger said, "Listen, Bronco, these are my new friends, and they're allowed wherever I say they're allowed. In fact, they're allowed wherever they say they're allowed, because they are beings in this world and they belong to be here, so you shush." And Bronco kind of, wah, and he walked off and then he turned back around and he said, "You know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I just get territorial. It's in my nature." And he walked away. And Bump and Buster looked at Ranger and said, "I've never seen a dog be nice before, let alone apologize. What is happening?" And Ranger said, "You just haven't seen enough of the world. Come on, let's keep going." And so Ranger went and got her guardian and said, "I'm going to go explore with these cats." And her guardian said, "Okay, but you got to be home because we have a big fancy dinner planned tonight." And Ranger said, "Can I bring my friends?" And the guardian looked at the little kitties and said, "I've always wanted cats to come to a dinner. That would be amazing." And so the three, Ranger and Buster and Bump, went off together on a new adventure. And pretty soon, Ranger went bolting across the park. And Buster said, "What happened?" And Bump said, "Oh, a squirrel." And they watched these squirrels dart all across, and Ranger was chasing them back and forth and having the time of her life. And so the kitties decided to start barking like dogs and chasing after the squirrels too. And pretty soon they were all having the best time. And one of the squirrels finally turned around and said, "Can you stop chasing me, please? I just want to get up the tree." And Ranger and Buster and Bump looked at each other, and then Bump said, "I'm sorry, we were just having fun. We thought you liked being chased." And the squirrel said, "Oh, you know what? I kind of do like being chased. Let's keep playing. Let's play tag. You're it." And the squirrel touched Bump and ran off. And then Bump thought, I've got to get someone else. And so Bump started chasing after Buster and Ranger and the squirrel whose name was Betty. And they just became friends with all the squirrels in the park. And it was amazing. And then, after the long day of running around the park and having the time of their lives, Ranger said, I'm hungry. Let's go home. And Buster and Bump said, absolutely. And so they puffed up their little kitty cat chest, and they pranced, and they strutted all the way to Ranger's house. And when they walked in, oh my goodness, the spread was amazing. There was a place for the humans that was like tacos, which is everybody's favorite food, and nachos and enchiladas and like lasagna for the humans because, dogs and cats really can't eat that much cheese. It's not good for them. And then there was a whole spread for Ranger and her dog friends that was like kibble and like wet food and water. And there was like this little like vegetarian scramble thing that their owner had cooked on the stove. Who does that? Who cooks dog food on the stove? And then they looked at the place for the cats. Oh my goodness, they'd never seen anything like this in their lives. It was a huge plate of fresh tuna and salmon dip for their little paws that they could dip their little paws in and then eat the salmon off of it. And then they had grass that they could eat because it's very good for cats to eat grass. It helps them poop. And so they were super excited. And then there was like this fresh sparkling thing of water. And it was the best meal they'd had in their entire kitten lives. And they rolled over at the end of it with their bellies hanging up in the air. And Bump said, Buster, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. And Buster said, I know. Let's do it again tomorrow. And then they had best night's sleep of their life. The end.
Meow.